it? No. I think we're loud enough, we don't need that.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back. It's lovely to see so many of you here in the room. We also have a number of people online. I don't have the exact numbers, but I'll communicate that later. We're going to start the session with a small song, and then I'll introduce you to the session. Jean-Marc?
Okay. But before the song, I would love to... I've just been watching, this film, the screening from Nicolas Supiot, a great friend of mine in Brittany, with his own way of dealing with bread, this kind of a spiritual part. And I would love to share, and also to invite you to a very short, it's not kind of a meditation, but just to get back to this place right here and now. It's a kind of, I think it's an old tradition from the Middle Ages, about, when the clock strikes in the village, you go for a stop. You stop and you just go back to where, for back to your memories, what have brought you here, where you are now, and just figure out where you're heading to. And it's kind of we call it the recall. Whenever we go somewhere, we're active in whatever field. We have a drive, yeah? Something we forget it, and then we lose track of our... So it's an interesting thing. And we've been working with a community in south of France called the Communauté de l'Arche. They're all farmers bakers too. They all have this mill that we all have. And this was an amazing thing, every hour to have this recall. They did it every hour. And every hour, you just feel you're already ahead of yourself, kind of. You just feel this feeling. And in England, I think I had this feeling even more busy, and go for it, go. And it's important, I think, for me, it's important to get back to this point. So let's just for a few seconds, just go into our inner image of where we're coming from, what kind of is our mission in life, when we came onto this earth. And just focusing on just some elements of our lives that just brought us here. And look into our future, where we're heading to. And the same with space, where we're coming from. And we are now here. And where are we heading to regarding space? Thank you. And now, again, as an opening, it's a song in Occitan. Occitan is a language of south of France that has been repressed, like more than Welsh and other kind of. In France, has been very hard. Hardly any people are speaking it right now, but it's still alive, and it starts again to be alive. There is schools now teaching this in Occitan, and it's a song about. As a farmer, when we plow a field, or there is a space at the end of the field which is not plowed, which is not cultivated, and it's the place where we rest, or when we work with horses, where the horse just gathers back his strength and his breath before going back into a new row, a new action, completely dedicated action. So it's a place where we meet also other people when we want to meet us, And it's a place where we just stop and contemplate what we've just done before going into action. And this time of this session or RFC, it's really for me like this kind of a talbero, which is this place and time where we just look together at what we've done and where we're heading to. So it's a song that goes like this. It's so the kind of the translation goes, it's on the Talbera, that is the freedom, the death that's waiting for you. I guess because you're just in Occitan and I get it in English, yeah. The death that is waiting you is keeping the truth. And whenever you go and you plow and you enter your action, then take whatever winds come towards yourself and go for it. So this is about that. E sull'alto albero che la libertà, l'amor che te spero guardo la verità, per passare inciso terre vire spasse, d'autore viso prendo ben sul nas. E sull'alto albero la ira la ira la 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 sull'alto albero la ira ma che la libertà. Sull'alto albero la ira la 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 sull'alto albero la ira ma che la libertà.
Okay, thank you, Jean-Marc, and welcome again to this session on Living Bread, the Way of the Peasant Baker. We have 3 speakers, and I'll just want to introduce them briefly. They'll say more about themselves during their talk. First of all, Rosy Benson, next to me. Rosy runs Field Bakery at Gothelney Farm in Somerset, and she's committed to creating meaningful work that nourishes her community and inspires agency as a baker. Then our singer, Jean-Marc, he is from France, as you've heard.
Was it bearable? Did you notice I was French?
So he started off by farming and running a biodynamic collaborative in the Pyrenees, and he is currently a peasant baker, un paysan boulanger. And finally, Rupert Dunn, who worked for many years with the food sovereignty movement, and he now is active with Shipton Mill as their small-scale farming and community engagement manager. He supports farmers to grow heritage wheat and bakers to bake with it. So, and I'm Michel Pimbert. I'll be facilitating this session. Rupert asked me to set a little bit some context and relate this talk to agroecological transitions, agroecological transformation. And I just want to highlight the importance, the emblematic importance of peasant bakers. As you have in the blurb, a peasant baker is someone who grows, mills, and bakes with landrace heritage grains on a very small scale and who combines innovation with tradition. Now, 2 French commentators, I think, very aptly captured the spirit and the struggles of peasant bakers. And I want to quote Anaïs Cram and Lorraine Lavocat. With their feet in the soil and their hands in bread dough, they work against the increasing industrialization of baking and wheat cultivation. Peasant bakers are reinventing the profession by bringing peasant seeds up to date. They are emancipating themselves from the seed industries in order to no longer depend on the industrial agricultural system. End of quote. Now, this whole attempt to move away from standardization and uniformity, be it biological, cultural, gastronomic, is very much at the heart of the peasant baker movement, which has really picked up in Europe since the 90s, I would say. And so there's an important shift from uniformity to diversity. And I think peasant bakers contribute to the theory and practice of agroecological transformation in at least 4 ways. There are more, but I just want to highlight 4. First, through their work that aims to diversify farming systems, the whole agroecological diversification of cereal crops and whole farms, by relying on locally adapted heritage grains and increasing the genetic diversity of this pool of heritage grains to offer more culinary delights, but also adaptation to climate change, as well as market volatility. That increase in biological diversity is part of the agroecological rediversification that goes on farms of peasant bakers. Second, that agroecological diversification really does increase the availability of dietary diversity in the form of wholesome living bread, and we'll be hearing more about this. Third, another important characteristics of the work of peasant bakers around Europe is that they strive to create local markets, to bring into closer proximity bakers as well as food eaters within territories and regions. So they're into this process of re-territorializing food systems. They emphasize the production in short food chains, short food webs, rather than long-distance supply chains. And last but not least, a very important feature of the peasant bakery dynamic is to affirm the centrality of the importance of farmer knowledge, the knowledge of women and men in running the farm, preparing bread, and reaching out to food eaters. They're recreating a more decentralized and autonomous system that have low carbon footprints and low ecological footprints whilst providing healthy foods. And we'll be hearing from a number of speakers who have very complementary takes on the work of the peasant baker, how this particular knowledge, this experiential knowledge, contributes to things like soil fertility, the design of new tools and machinery, participatory plant breeding, seed selection, evolutionary plant breeding, as well as bread preparation and baking. With that, I'll stop, otherwise I'll say too much. And I'd like to hand over to our three speakers. And we're really privileged to have three people of this talent with such grounded experience. They'll offer complementary perspectives, as I said, and I'd like to invite them in turn to share their experiences. So I'll start with Rupert, if you'd like to go ahead. And then we'll go to you, Jean-Marc, and then we'll finish and hopefully have a bit of time for a plenary discussion, including taking questions that we'll receive online. Over to you, Rupert.
Okay, thank you, Michel. Before starting with Shipton Mill, I was growing, milling, baking in Pembrokeshire in West Wales. For Tortha Tir, and I'm happy to see Sam and Alma and Buffy and Alan here since taking it on and taking it to the next stage. So a lot of what I'll talk about in terms of the architecture of the peasant bakery is from that experience, but also from what I've learned with people like Nicolas Soupiot in Brittany and other peasant boulangers in France. The quote that you saw from the introduction in the program is from a document called Panis Vita. So I think, Jean-Marc, you maybe talk about the gathering a bit more. But I've got some copies of the Panis Vita Manifesto, which is a really beautiful document. It's just one page. So I've put some out on the table behind, and you're welcome to pick one up and take it home. That'll give you more of a feeling of the ethos of the peasant bakery movement, which is a representation of two meetings between French and Italian peasant boulangers, or panadieri, contadini panadieri in Italy, I think they're called. So I wanted to start with a quote from this wonderful book, Restoring Heritage Grains, which you can buy at the Chelsea Green stall downstairs. Someone might have to correct my pronunciation, but Ila Rugosa talks about, in the Arabic world, filaha means farming or husbandry, and fella means husbandman, tiller of the soil, or farming peasant. Filaha also means to thrive, prosper, well-being, or happiness. The word is sung out from the minarets of every mosque during the call to prayer. Hayya ala la falah. I think that's how anyone can correct me on that? Yeah, is that? Say that again? Thank you. Which means come to well-being or come to holiness. So husbandry, well-being, and worship are inextricably united. For those of you that saw the Nicolas Suppiot film earlier, then you can see that reflected in his work. So to sort of talk about a bit more the nuts and bolts of a peasant bakery, I've got a few photos to illustrate. And I think there's a couple of videos in there showing some of the machinery working. So there's a few elements that generally makes up a peasant bakery in France and Italy, and that is that you grow tall straw heritage wheats, and normally they're evolutive populations. So those varieties will evolve every year according to themselves, really. So the farmer obviously has an important hand in maybe creating that population. In the case of the population we're growing in West Wales, that was 3 French populations put together, one of them from Nicolas Suppiot, with the introduction of some Hen Gymro, Old Welshmen, thanks to Andy Forbes for bringing that back into use. So there'll be cross-pollination in the field every year, and new varieties will emerge in the field. So it's less of a sort of managerial approach, if you like. It's more of allowing nature to take charge of the evolution of what happens in the field. But it's a co-evolution with us and nature. The bread is always sourdough. It's always made by hand, generally in a dough trough, rather than using an electric dough mixer, and baked in a wood-fired oven. So there's different kinds of wood-fired ovens. You can see one here. This is the one down in Pembrokeshire. So it's 2 decks with the fire lit underneath. That's one in France, I think, that one. A lot of them use. This is another one in the Pyrenees, which is a homemade cob oven, which friends of Jean-Marc's and I bake with, and that's a much lower cost option, and it works beautifully. And then this is a 4-ground Mayer oven, so they're much more, substantive in terms of building them in situ. But the fire's lit underneath, and you can see there's a funnel that ejects the flame straight into the oven chamber. Generally, it's considered important in France that if you're baking with an indirect fired oven, like the first one, where the fire's underneath and the decks are on top, you don't actually call it wood-fired wood-fired baked bread, because you need the fire to go directly into the chamber that you're baking in. And as you can appreciate with someone like Nicolas Suppiot, his lighting the fire in the hearth and then cleaning all of the hot coals out and then putting the bread in. So there's more labour involved in that as well, so that's important to recognise. That's a young wheat field of my daughter a few years ago. It's my sister Claire, give you an idea of the different varieties in the field. She's holding some vetch in there, which is... there's some seed here, by the way, grown in Hereford, which is the same population, and you can welcome to take some afterwards. There's some small bags there. You'll have to pick the vetch out. I recommend that. So the mill that's used, Jean-Marc's going to talk more about this, is the Astrier mill, so I'm going to leave him to talk more about it, but all the peasant bakers really tend to use the Astrier stone mill. And I'll leave Jean-Marc to talk more about that. Obviously, you need a combine. That's another picture of the first oven, some bread peels. I don't know how to press play. Oh, no, there you go, it's doing it. So that's the Astrier mill in operation. That's the sieve. And then you can see the flour coming out. You get about 80%, 82% extraction from the grain in that flour, which doesn't look like it. It looks very white, but so that'll give you a little idea of that. So there's an example of a dough trough with dividers in, so you can divide the dough. Oh yes, there's the Astrier mill again. Apologies for the order. As you can see, the Astrier is quite a small unit, about 12.5 kilos an hour. This is a really important piece of kit for cleaning vetch and wild oats out. The vetch particularly important to clean out after the harvest. That's a marrow, so it's an indented cylinder cleaner. You can find them in France quite cheaply and get them up and running. There was no other way at the time we could clean the vetch out of the wheat, unless you've got someone with a modern colour sorter that's able to come to you and do that. Often you need a good tonnage for that as well, and you might not be producing You can see the fire underneath with the decks on top there, and that's the bakery in Pembrokeshire. Yeah, again, dough proving in the dough trough. Normally, basically, you just mix the dough and then leave it, and then come and turn it every 20 minutes, half an hour or so for the bulk proof, and then generally as the dough develops, divide it into smaller batches and then shape it into the loaves. It's normally about a 5-hour proving process. That's the other cleaner, Torthetier's cleaner, which is a tray cleaner, which we use before going into the cylindrical cleaner. And, oh, yeah, that's another one that's crept in there. So that's another example of the Maro, the indented cylinder cleaner. So these are built in the 1940s, but still very useful. I think Mark Lee might be here. He's just set one up on his farm, I think successfully. So that's good to hear. So I think, yeah, that's it in terms of just showing you, just giving you an idea of the picture of some of the equipment that peasant bakers use. In terms of scale, generally it's about 20-25 acres of wheat. Generally translate, with the Astray mill at least, a ton of wheat to a ton of bread, because you're using 20-25% or more at the mill, but then obviously adding water to the dough. So roughly in terms of economy, when I was doing it, was costing about £450 an acre to produce a ton. If you're getting a ton per acre with the heritage varieties on average, then sometimes it was more, sometimes less. Then if it was costing £450 to produce that ton, we were selling the bread for £4.50 a kilo, then that's about 4,500 per acre that you're in revenue from selling the bread, which is also that principle of of making cheese from your milk, isn't it? Same sort of principle. So it's add value on the farm, which is one of the practical reasons why. I mean, in France, for instance, the paysan boulanger will pay the tax of the farmer, not the baker. So it's quite an advantage in France. Here that's not a dynamic that would give us an advantage. But yeah, so I think if you're baking about 150 loaves a week, then probably looking at revenue of about 35,000 a year from that sort of thing. So depending on the size of your oven and the number of people that you might have, or most peasant bakers don't bake more than 3 days a week. 3 days is quite a lot anyway, because you're farming, it's physical work in the bakery, and it's quite tiring. So you have to put a lot of energy into making bread. So yeah, I think that kind of covers nuts and bolts. I don't know if I've left much out, but Jean-Marc, you can fill in for me, and yeah, if there's anything else. Thanks. Yep.
Perfect timing. Thank you, Rupert.
Right.
Yeah. Jean-Marc, would you like to step in?
Yeah, I can. So maybe looking more into the spirit or the philosophy of these people. I would just love to share about my story around that, because I met André Astrier. So this guy was make the traditional mills working better, let's say, by adding. I will just remember a technical thing, which I think is very important, because it just like makes the traditional mill working better and really fitting the actual need of the farmers. It means that the traditional mill, it was very difficult to make a very constant flour, because let's say the quality of the flour was made through the quantity of grain flowing through the stones and against the weight of the stone. So imagine if there's too much grain flowing between the stones, then the grain will lift the stones up, and then it would be coarse flour. And if it's too few grains flowing through, then it will crushing completely down and burn the flour. So that's why the miller was always like being here and checking the flour, how it was coming out, to make adjustment. So this guy was saying that's not possible. Farmers can't either work on the land, growing the grain, and work all day long to checking the flour. It's not possible. So he was coming. But he did this coming back to farming in the 60s, and he started to make his own grain. And so because he was coming from a mechanic, he was a mechanic. He worked on that. So what he did to make it simple and quick, he just added to this old mills two technologies. First one is the technology of balancing the stones. I don't know, someone said the stones are kind of balancing themselves because they were not completely balanced, so there were more weight on one side than another. So you can imagine the stone was doing like this, like ripping it, So there was also grain but not fully put into flour that was going out, and then some to crush. That's why they also had to pass 2 or 3 times the same flour through the stone to make it properly available for human consumption. So what he did, he used this technique that we use to balance the tires, in the garage there. When you have your tires to be balanced, you have this thromboscopic lamp. Something like in the garage they put some weight on some places of your wheel so that it doesn't vibrate. Yeah. So it does, doing the same thing on the stone, so that the stone is perfectly even and perfectly balanced. So that's one thing, so that there's no more of this wobbly movement. The second thing that he added is the bearing technology. The bearing can stand a huge pressure. So inside here, I said we need to lift the stone and then push it back down so that we can measure exactly like a tenth of millimeter between the stones to make it absolutely perfect and all the time working in the right way. So then he put the stone onto a spring, and then with the means of this bearing, they were pushing down with a metal frame on top, and then we were adjusting by imagine you have like 1 millimeter of the of your bolt, so you got like this angle, like a tenth of millimeter, or even less, that you can adjust the stone according to the quality of the flour or the grain you want to have. And then the mills go day and night without any surveillance. So this is great because I had this mill because I worked for 1 year with Andreas Trier, made with him 5 mills of those mills. And then I had mine, sure, after that, because, that was the best we can ever find. And it was great. That was my first thing that was, the bread was subsiding, actually, the farm. Because I also milking cows that I started with. And, but the bread was the thing I could, bake and have the money the next day. And this is all for the family, that's a great security. Because you have, milking cow, you got, the milk is coming a year after, with the carving and things. So, and then you get the cheese need to be month to get ready, and then so it's very. So with the bread, was a very good way of starting the business, and with subsiding all the other places of the farm. And so what I want to say also about this, for the philosophy of that, is that. So again, that was a way of, as you said, as Michel said, it was a way of engaging also with the customers, because bread has also, it's the food that has more meaning, it's like, it's a Christ on the altar, it's very important in the culture, especially in Eastern, Occidental culture. So bringing one's own bread to the market and connecting with the customers, it was really like making a deep connection with these people that were in supporting the farm. So, for example, when I needed, once I bought one of these cleaners, but I didn't have the money, so I asked my customers, can you put the money up front so I can buy that, and then I reimburse you with bread. So they put like 1,000 quid up front, and then every week said, well, 1-2 breads off, and then we paid the. And I did actually I never went to the bank, never. Just all my investment I did in this way. All the customers, they give the money up front, and then after when they just finished paying having their bread back for their loan, they were asking me, do you need anything else? Because it's great just to give the money for you up front, and I have my bread kind of free every week. So this is one thing. This is also about this social connection and social building up of on a small scale and a human relationship. But also there is also a part of activism in this kind of work. Because I just wanted to read a story. So we gathered all around Andreas Trier. At that time, still in the 90s, when I started my farm down in the Pyrenees, there was a law that's saying that it was forbidden to mill, to make flour. We needed a right of milling to do that. And there was none of this right available. Even if you had the money to pay for it, there was none, because all the big mills had bought all them up. So there is no more. So the thing, we were outlaw milling. So the idea is that we wanted to change the law. So we said, okay, we gathered all, And every year, so I had a national meeting with all the farmers bakers from France, and it was a great, like, it was such a, like, well, not to as many people as here, but with lots of exchange and practical things, baking bread, milling, exchanging seeds, you know, and that's what building up the culture around the bread and the milling and the seeds and the soil cultivation and everything. But it was also bringing us together and to stand for an eventuality of being brought into court, because we were outlawed making flour. But the fact is, we did that for 20 or 30 years without having any problem. Because actually the people, even the government and these big mills, they knew that that was our aim, to be taken into the court to change the law. So they just left us in peace, you know, all the time. But that was the kind of activism, like we didn't go for the fight, but we were standing here. This is our way for us, this is a way of baking, this is a way of working with the customer, and that's it. And if you're not okay with that, just come to us and we're going to maybe discuss on that. And that was, from the beginning, from the start, also a deep activism. And it was about standing on our grounds. Grounds is also an interesting word for this night, about, you know, by grinding and ground, and you stand on your grounds, you know, something. So you're standing on something you've ground, you know. So it's interesting, this thing. So very interesting. It's interesting. And so this is about the philosophy. I mean, this is what I could. Yes, about, you know, sharing, all on a very human scale, and also dedicating to the spirituality about, you know, what's happening in these life processes when you're very close to them, when you bake by hand. Bake by hand, you know, what's happening, life is happening just here in your hand. It's just, you go very humble towards that, because it's like, this is what feeds the humanity, and it's just what you've got in your hand. And it's not you that's making the process. All these millions of bacteria and yeast and fungi that are within this, and what comes from the soil, which is doing the job. You're just like stewards or whatever, you know. And this is also this deep connection to realm of life and to healing, and to what we've been talking about this morning at the opening of the conference. But it's just like really an everyday connection, and like a ritual. Like you know, you don't need to go to the church when you're baking. You're actually on the altar every day, and connected with all these forces, and it's just great. So, and to bring this bread to the people is really also making something very, very important. And you know, when the people say, when you maybe after 10 years, I took some days off, you know. No, I was 7 years, not 10, 7 years without stopping any time. I take some days off, and then people, oh God, we missed your bread, you know. And it's like, so it's like people are kind of buying a bit of yourself, you know. So because it's a deep duration, it's so deep. And this is actually for me this foundation of this future of local resilient communities and soil. Yeah, I think let's round it up. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Jean-Marc.
Well, that's
and I'll hand over
good
to
one
Rosy,
to follow.
who's going to talk about her experience of setting up a farm bakery.
Yeah, thank you very much.
I think we need to put Rosy's slides on.
I've got some slides. I've got some pictures.
I haven't put yours up yet. I don't think.
Well, there is one.
We put, yeah, is that yours?
That is me.
Yeah,
That's
fine.
me. In a random order, but we'll take it. Hi, I'm Rosy. Thank you for coming to listen to us all. So I bake at Gothany Farm, which is Fred Price's farm, who's in the audience. Thank you for coming. It's in the foothills of the Quantocks, which is down in Somerset. It's a beautiful 500-acre mixed farm, so 250 acres are the home farm, and then there's another 250-ish on a 5-year tenancy. I met Fred about 7 years ago. I emailed him lots and came to visit the farm, and he was super generous to show me around. At that point, I'd already been baking for about 3 or 4 years, so and I've been baking for 10, 11 years now, which is interesting, you know, to keep it going, to keep it as a career, and to start to think of it as its purpose and sustaining me in the role. Yeah, so I met Fred. He was super generous with his knowledge, and I just found a kindred spirit in what we were doing. We both care a lot about our jobs and our role in the system of change, and it seemed a good one to kind of keep hold of, so I did. Yeah, so just as a bit of background, I actually came from working in artisan bakeries in cities, so I worked in Bristol and then London and then over in the States, and they were always high street bakeries, really busy, but we were using commodity wheat, so white, low extraction, roller milled flour, usually from Shipton. Everyone's bread tastes the same, pretty much. It was a kind of an inert substance that was very rubbery, and it was a blend of wheat. So some of it would have been grown in the UK, but most of it would have been imported organic wheat. And I just thought that was silly. Like, so many bakers are unaware of what they're partaking in when they're in that system. I knew there was people like Fred growing wheat in the southwest, and I wanted to support them. So it started off as a kind of, let's support the people working in something different. And then a whole community of people have been part of that journey of learning. So I have been lucky enough to work in some of the best bakeries around the States who have the same mill that I have on the bakery now, and I've tasted things, I've experienced the people and the culture around it, and I think that has helped give this kind of vision of where we're going on the farm. So I'm just going to see what we've got. So this is some random pictures, sorry. This is Fred on one of our workshops. So the bakery started as a kind of workshop space, and that's because I just wanted to bring more bakers and more beginner bakers down to the farm, and I wanted to tie the work of mixing a dough and then going outside and seeing it growing and just expose people to the whole process of bread. So it was a very tentative first step, and this was like mid-lockdowns, so a bit risky as well. And then I started a bread club, which is a good way of starting to pull people into, like, locking into supporting the farm and the bakery. I don't think they know how to get out of it, basically. And it's a weekly payment for a loaf of bread. This is the inside of half the bakery, so that's our 4-deck oven, which is pretty cool. I'm using electric. There are solar panels on the farm. Hopefully we'll get more as the pressure to need some energy production on the farm grows. And then the other half of the bakery is where I sell bread. So every week we have an open bakery on a Saturday morning. And that's where 50 to 100 people just show up on the farm. They can wander around, they can see the pigs, they can chill out with their friends, they can get coffee and some hot food. And basically I wanted to pull more people onto the farm. Rather than me taking my bread to a market or to a city centre, I thought, what's the best way of using my time? It's actually to help people have more of an experience on the farm themselves and see that when they're buying into this, they're actually part of the landscape around them. So this is like local people from Spaxton, which is a local village, and other villages around Gothany Farm. So they're people that we see every day, every Saturday. It's the same faces, which is lovely. Get to know their name. It's just me in production. And then I have lots of help, like friends run front of house and help me actually sell the bread, because I'm usually a bit tired. Yeah, so that's the oven. That's the front of the bakery. That should have been first. Got hay bales out, it's pretty low-key. What else have we got? This is some of the workshops. So I get friends who are brilliant pastry chefs to use whole grain flour and start teaching other people how to use this stuff. That's another friend, Katie, doing a fermentation workshop. So it's not just bread and grain. I'm trying to pull in more makers and more people that are interested in the politics of food and how and it just brings a really diverse amount of people to the farm and interested in what we do. That's a Saturday morning with some random cakes. So it's pretty basic, just all lined up on the front, and then we just sell for 4 hours, and then we close. So this production actually starts on a Thursday for a Saturday morning, so I do all of the milling. 100% of the grain used in all of the baked products is grown on the farm and freshly milled. So that's something I want to talk about a little bit more, actually, because that's the key tenet of this situation. So other miller, Fred, on the right, is the farmer at Gothany. And then that's Andrew, who built the stone mill that we're working on. So this is a 40-inch new American stone mill. Some of the bakers in the room might have heard of it already. It's a brilliant tool. It's very simple to use, so bakers and anyone who's new to milling can start to use them. They freshly mill the flour, so you get a more aromatic, very fine whole grain. We have a sifter as well, so we do extract off the large bran particles on the outside of the grain, but then I ferment back in the mids, which is like the finer bran, into the mix. So we try and get as much nutrition in the bread as possible, and that is one of the biggest things that I was missing when I was working in other bakeries. We didn't really have any control over what the recipes were or how much whole grain we were using in the bread, and I knew that nutrition is one of those things that as a baker that's your leverage of actually doing a job that actually heals people and helps to give them a more sustaining food experience. So that's our new American. It does have a hopper that goes on the top, so the grain goes into the middle, top stone rotates, beautiful flour comes out. This produces about 50 kilos an hour, so it's perfect for the bakery that my bakery's needs. And then in the last kind of 4 or 5 months, I've started to mill for other bakeries. So there's a small network of friends of mine who have bakeries as well, and I service their whole grain needs. So that is a tiny, tiny proportion of flour in the scheme of what they're using. I'm under no illusion that they're 100% whole grain, fresh milled bakeries, but they are starting to think about where do they get their grain locally from, how can I get the best out of that grain using fresh milled, using it from a new American is a good way of doing that. And then, yeah, it just means that we have this tight little group of people who are committed to supporting each other and having a dialogue in all directions about what's working and what varieties they like the taste of, or what functions well, or just their experience of visiting the farm and collecting the flour and how they engage with it is completely different to ordering in a ton of roller milled white flour, basically. Andrew came across for the UK Grain Lab, which some of you probably went to. It's in Nottingham. It's a brilliant thing put on by Kim Bell. And she's been Fred and I's mentor for a long time and really good friend. She's an incredible woman who just thinks about the bigger picture as us bakers and what we're doing within that, which is brilliant gathering of people. Anyway, so Andrew came over, and I visited him in Vermont as well to know how to use this mill and how it was made. So there's a lot of connections within the world that this kind of baking brings. And I think that's what really supports us. So even though I'm a solo baker on a farm, you know, doing the hours, it's quite difficult because it's a new system and it's a bit more awkward sometimes, and there's failures and there's a lot of joy as well. I do feel like there's a huge supportive group that are behind me and we're behind each other. So if you're interested in doing this kind of thing, like, I want to be really honest about the realities of it, but also it's a beautiful thing, and I've enjoyed every minute of like the last 2 years pretty much, because it is so much more control and more autonomy and more joy in the work that we do. And it's brought so many more people into my life, and definitely into Fred's life, because he was on a farm with not so many people before. There's definitely a lot more people that come onto the farm. Yeah, that's some flour bags that's just a few varieties that I've been milling from other farms as well, just because it's really good if we share seed between farms within the networks. and we're still developing what varieties or what populations even work well and taste good, and developing our own palates for it and our experience of it. So it's a really new part of baking to be part of. This is some of the trial plots. So it's brilliant in that this is probably one of the reasons why I was interested in Gothany, actually, and Fred, and what he was doing is he's putting so much time and effort into growing out thousands of varieties of different grains over the years. And it's just incredible to go and see that change and be on the farm all the year round and see it come into fruition and just understand what kind of things he's looking for. It's not always about quantity or yield, it's definitely other kind of agronomic points to that. I think I've got a picture, there was a picture of it at the end just before harvest, and you start to see the head differentiation a bit more and it gets even more beautiful. So bringing more people to the farm, so bakers, to see that is a really moving experience, actually, to talk together within the field with Fred. A lot of them haven't even seen a wheat plant before or even know that there's different varieties out there. So like I kind of maybe seeing myself as someone that can help pull more people in, because I was like that, 8-9 years ago. So I can understand what the barriers people feel they have against being part of this, but there's definitely loads of opportunity out there. This is the farm lane that we're down, so we just have one sign that says bread, pork, coffee, and it seems to bring enough people in. So we should probably do a little bit more marketing, but for now it's probably enough for me to manage. As you can probably see, it's my intuition that took me here. Like, I didn't really want to be in a strip lit back room in a huge team, having no agency. Not saying they're all like that, but it definitely felt that way after so many years. And like this is a whole gamble and like world of imagination to see where it might go and how many more people we can pull in and how we can be collaborative and practice how we communicate with each other and how we make decisions. That's all like evolving over time. And I think if I look to where we are now, I'd think that was really scary and that would take so much work. But really, we've just done it day by day, and we've built up a community of people, and that's a really beautiful thing. I would love to say more about how beautiful it is to work with fresh milled flour. So stone milled is the big leap that most people make from going from roller milled white flour, so just bringing in a bit more flavour, so the germ into the wheat. And it makes a livelier product. It makes something that has a timeline of freshness, and you want to jump in there and get it when it's aromatic and it's buttery and it's got, it forces you to put your head into your hands and grounds me. And I don't know where I'd be if I didn't have bread. It keeps me in my cycles of work, I suppose, and I love it for that. I think once you're a baker, it's quite hard to lose that work drive of the timers going and the fermentations going, and you need to keep going. And the beauty of not knowing quite how it's going to end up after the bake, that's the beautiful side of baking. And it's so nice that Fred can see what he's grown in its end product. That's lovely. This is bread club loaves, so they've got to be square because they've got to fit in the box. So there's 5 drop-off points in Bristol, which is where I live, and there's also a drop-off point at the farm on Saturdays, so people come then. And then I do hearth form, like normal loaves, but not all wheat suit that. And I think there needs to be a little mind shift of what the aesthetic of a beautiful loaf is. Like, a lot of people are more familiar with a square loaf, and I think that's something that we could go for a bit more. That's some YQ, I think, which plenty to say about YQ, but I won't. That is some of the freeform loaves that we do for a restaurant. I try not to do too much wholesale because that's a step of removal of me to the eaters, and I think you can start to lose value a bit there, even though that would be the obvious thing to do, being so far away from people. That's some of the flour. You can see how moist and like soft it is. That's it just out of the mill. So that's a whole grain. I think it's orange Devon rough chaff, which is one of the heritage varieties that I make a lot of loaves from so far this year. That's the beautiful mixer and some bubbly dough. And yeah, I just wanted to finish with all the people that the farm has brought. Farm has brought all the people, that's what I mean. That's just looking out over Gothany with a group of producers that work with one of the restaurants that Fred works with in London, and so it's a pork farm as well. Lots of pigs, outdoor reared pigs, no soya, just fed on what the acreage gives, which is quite unique. Some baked things, do lots of pastry work. So it's not just bread, that's what I'm saying. So when I put the mill on, I'm prepping pastry, I'm doing admin, I'm doing all the other million jobs of running a bakery. I think that's the thing that I have to grapple with. I'm running a business, the stresses of that, first 2 years of any business. And then there's the nice side of it, the work, the actual repetitive, lovely shaping of loaves and bringing it out the oven and getting the thanks for it. You know, that's all lovely, but there is a lot of reality of having a food business in the UK. This is the first oven that we had on the farm, a Rothco. So it's just a tiny 12 bread oven. And I've just given it to the community kitchen in Bristol. So I started with the community kitchen like 10 years ago, just helping out. And it's a relationship that I want to carry on. So we're thinking of doing community bakes every month. And getting them to use Southwest grain flour. So that's the idea. Some more bread. Sausage rolls, obviously, because it's porky time on the farm. This is Gothany. I think there's a cover crop of some type for the pigs to be on at some point. Mince pie season just ended, thank God. This is our mill. So the window is to the other side of the space, so I can see it running when I'm working, which is quite useful, actually. That's looking at some of the trial plots. You can see some oats on the right. They're kind of the wispy wits. There's the nearer harvest on the trial plots as well. Yeah, and this is the Southwest Grain Network, which are our friends. They're all a random bunch of people with some shared values now. And we are farmers, millers, bakers, eaters, academics, all sorts. And we gather on the farm occasionally. We should be more. Basically, there's a capacity there to help organise that we probably need to help fund or do some other work on. But these are the people that support all of us and hopefully are thinking about the future of our food supply in grain and especially. But it comes into everything, really. Lots of overlap. That's me. Yeah, that's it. Thank you very much. And come visit the farm. Yeah.
Lovely. Hey, thank you very much, Rosie. So we've heard from our colleagues, and we have about half an hour for a conversation. The floor is open for comments, points of clarification, questions. We can do this in two ways. We can stay in plenary, or more fun, we could break up in small groups, talk in small groups for about 10 minutes, and then come back in plenary, possibly with some comments and questions. It's really up to you. I'm easy either way, but we have those two options. We don't have to stay in this format. We can break up in small groups, but if there's a general reluctance to break up in small groups, we stay as is. Speak up. No? Stay? Okay, fair enough. All right, so we stay all cozy together. I wonder if there are any farmers in the room who'd like to go down this pathway to wheat production, cereal production, and eventually bread making. And similarly, are there any bakers in the room who would like to take up this way of working and even this way of life? just to start off. I'd like to give space first to farmers and bakers and ask the academic types, the journalists, to wait a little bit. I'm very keen to hear from practitioners on the ground, and I'm sure Rupert, Jean-Marc and Rosy also would like that. I saw a hand raised there. Maybe you could give your name and perhaps stand up so that everyone can see you and hear you.
Hello, good afternoon. I'm Will Tooby. I'm from the Fold at Bransford, between Worcester and Morven. I started farming heritage wheats back in the 70s, and then left it to do something else, and I'm back into it again now. Really excited by it, along with applying compost extracts and so on to help build the soil biome. And I'm getting older. You know, I turned 70 this year. I don't have children who want to take on the farm. I'm reducing its size to about 50 acres. I'd love to find someone who'd like to come on board and take on that work and take that forward. Because it's really exciting times, you know, these population wheats and which ones do we grow? There's so many opportunities, and getting hold of April bearded and so on, and getting my old mill back and running again that used to run sort of back in the 70s. And yes, great space there to set up a baker. So if anyone's interested in these things, talk to me. And I guess my questions would be around, so I pulled down my lovely granary to make it was falling to bits, but it had all the facilities in there to make a cafe, and that's now a fabulous space as a cafe. And I'm rebuilding a granary now and doing that, and the right equipment to go in there and so on and so forth. It's quite an interesting, you know, that sort of a micro granary. What does that look like? You know, what kit's in there? So I'm interested to hear you talking about the cleaning equipment and so on. But more information in that arena would be really helpful for someone like myself. So there's a start of it.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Do you want to answer that now? Yeah.
Yeah, do you want to answer that? Or should I?
Yeah, you can.
Yeah, we'll answer the question so we don't lose them. I think you've asked a really important question. Would Jean-Marc or Rupert?
Yeah, well, that's fantastic to hear you say all that. Thanks. I don't know, micro granary. Different ways you could do it. I suppose you can, if you've got a secure shed, you know, then and it's dry and you've got a good floor, and then I know Mark, you know, keeps all his in bags, don't you, Mark? So yeah, and that's okay for up to a year or so. But a lot of the I've seen some really good silos in France where they're maybe up to 12-ton silos. Or you can build them as you wish out of sheet metal with a perforated conical bottom, and then you can blow air through the bottom of them to if you need to get cold air is dry air generally, so it doesn't have to be hot air, and blow the cold air through them. One problem which we always encountered was if we had a wet harvest, you know, the drying process can be quite damaging to the germination with those big gas bin dryers. Obviously, you don't want to dry the grain with diesel because that taints it if you're milling it. A gas dryer, could often harm the germination, take it down 20% or so, or 15% often sometimes. So that was sometimes an issue. But if you're on a really small scale, I mean, Jean-Marc once told me that the peasants in France used to, you know, have the grains in smaller containers and put dry wood sticks in them. The wood would absorb the moisture from the grain. So that's an old school method. I don't know if you want to add to that, Jean-Marc. But
Yeah, that's the storing and then the cleaning system. So there's opportunities to find, as Rupert said, those cleaning machines in France. I've just found one for some of the farmers you were in touch with, and I found it, and I went into this kind of agri-affair stuff, and I found almost 20 of them, you know, available. So it's just a matter of bringing them over. Here there's none. There's no way. I already bought 4 of them over for different farmers. So this is good equipment that can be used for a small scale and they're really efficient for cleaning. So that's good. And as you said, for storage, you have to be careful of these elements of the drying. And then that's it. Then it's the milling. So the milling, that's also There's lots of mills. So-called mills available on the market, apart from the traditional ones. And some are bringing into the flour all the quality of the grain. Sometimes they heating up too much. They destroying the grain instead of really milling it slowly and smoothly. So this is something we could also. There is different mills, but I know more about the Astrier mill, which is just a replication of the traditional old mill that has been used for centuries and centuries. And so the modern ones are kind of ways of making the flour, but I was like, I'm not really sure of the issue of the result of that, because some they bring up the heating, problems of the not restoring the germs into the flour. Some are it's about the break. The break. It's for sure we break the grain. Yeah, we making flour. We destroy the grain. So that's something. But there's different ways of doing it. And I think for the flour, it's important also that the process is also smooth and they respect the raw grain. So that's and then it's a bakery. So you have already talking a lot about making it into bread. Yeah, it would be great to have loads of people engaging into this small scale, so that we can refurbish the land and the villages with bakers and small farmers everywhere. So that's a great initiative, and it's good to spread the news. Yeah.
I think Rosy has a point to offer.
It's brilliant to do the milling process and then baking to see what changes that I make on the mill have an effect in the mix. So that being part of both is just a wonderful thing, really, to have more respect for that as a craft and a role within our kind of local grain system. The one thing that I was thinking of is maybe there might be some farmers in the room who farm conventionally or have only farmed at a scale of 25 tonne in a truck, so taking the grain off the farm after harvest quite quickly. And so moving towards supplying mills or bakeries that are a smaller scale, if it's going to be one farm and 5 bakeries, might require a bit of thought around infrastructure of grain storage and keeping the grain in the right condition. Also doing checks, like mycotoxin checks, before it goes out to the mills, because it's really important that we do all those checks in our system, because it happens in the much bigger milling systems, and I think it can get lost sometimes on the way. So we do need to think about how we keep the standard, and even better even. And also when you're milling, you don't want to be milling wet grain. It just annoys the mill and doesn't make very good bread. So yeah, think about all those things if you're going to go into providing grain for bakers or millers.
Okay, lots of experience there. I hope that satisfies you for now, but obviously you could continue, right? Yeah. There was another hand raised over here. Who was next?
Hi.
Hello.
My name's Emma Park, and I run a small bakery in Exeter, and I've seen Rosy at UK Grain and met Fred as well, but I haven't been to the farm, because when you run a bakery that runs 7 days a week, you're just too busy to do it. Please, any farmers here thinking of growing heritage grain, please do it, and then find the bakers. It's such a rewarding experience. You've already inspired me all with your the little film with the French baker, that getting your hands into the dough, the magic of it, and the community. And I think that really is the way we need to go back. But the disconnection between the actual, the people who grow the wheat and the people who use the wheat has just been too big for too long. And a bit like you, sir, I'm not quite 70, but I'm heading in that direction. And it takes a lot of energy. Baking is hard work. So hats off to you, Rosy. So thank you. It's not really a question, it's just a comment. Please, more farmers, grow more heritage wheat.
That's fine. Thank you for that comment. Yeah. You're next, I think.
Hello. I'm a farmer in the south.
Could you say-
Sorry, hello, there we go.
Could you say who you are?
I'm Jenna from Ashlack up in Cumbria in the South Lakes. And we're looking at starting our own micro bakery or even just planting some heritage wheat. I have experience being in the south and think the Southwest Grain network is amazing, but we found it really hard to find people to connect with up in Cumbria and in the north. It may be something to do with the fact that the land's not quite the right thing to grow wheat into. But I just wondered if there's any online communities or forums where we could find what we need and have that connection without it needing to be just down the road.
Thank you. Do you want to say that?
Yeah, the UK Grain Lab, so coming to Nottingham or wherever it's going to be held next year, usually around November, but it might be a different time of year next time. But yeah, it's meeting more people. It's driving around looking who's growing wheat even, or other grains. It doesn't necessarily need to be that they're down the road from you. I think it is really about relationship building, and if you've got someone that is into the same stuff, travelling the wheat to you, if you've got a small setup, is not a bad thing in my mind. I think start with some connections and then more will come. I think build the place and they will come kind of idea. It has been my case anyway on the farm.
Yeah, if the Grain Lab's got an online thing, I think you can put your contact in and join that, and then that's a good forum. Also, Jean-Marc and I, we've put some sort of new provisional dates for doing a 3-day residential at Emerson College and Tablehurst Farm. So, yeah, that's going to be looking at May now. I've got some flyers on the back table, and I'll put some out on the front here afterwards, so pick up one of those. So that'll be a 3-day sort of immersive seed to loaf, with all the things we talked about. I think, also there's some contact sheets if you want to fill it in, then we can, follow up with email afterwards, who you want to connect with. We'll try and connect you to, if we can, yeah.
Were there any further points? Yes, over there. I don't know your name yet, so.
Hi, my name's Tom McFarlane. I'm from Chipping Norton at Little Wallrate. We grow heritage grain in various guises for distilleries or hopefully for bread as well. And I'm very excited about the prospect of milling our own wheat and selling it directly to bakers. Just curious how a representative from a mill fits in that concept.
Well, I suppose John wants to support, I suppose...
Is it like a turkey voting for Christmas?
Yeah, well, I suppose John wants to support smaller farmers, as John Lister owns Shipton Mill as well, so I think that's partly why he's asked me to come and do some of that work. And so while Shipton's, supplying larger bakeries with bigger quantities with the roll mill flour, they're also doing the stone milled, from Tetbury, and also smaller farmers in other countries like in Italy and Abruzzo as well. So, yeah, I think there's, you could call it a contradiction if you like, but there's certainly diversity in that. So I think the exciting thing is that there's a market there amongst the Shipton community, and more farmers can grow heritage for Shipton, and we can get more of that in what's represented there, because I think it could be bigger than what it is.
So if a farmer came to you and said, can you mill my crop for a fee and I want to sell it direct to the baker, that'd be okay?
Yeah, they often do that. Yeah,
okay.
Type milling, yeah. And often also, we've been milling your grain, Henry's grain, for the last few months as well. So we're selling your flour at Shipton. So that's been great. That's baked really well, by the way, Henry. Yeah. Yeah, lovely. Oh, sorry, Henry's. Yes. Sorry, do apologise, next door. But we've been milling Henry's grain, who's next to you. Yeah, and it's beautiful stuff to bake with. That's been great. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, you must do. Yeah, I'll bake one for you. Sorry for the confusion with Henry there.
There's a comment or question here.
Oh, yeah, more a comment, but just it's a really nice model.
Maybe you could say who you are.
I'm Dominic. I have a bakery out in Suffolk, East Anglia. Yeah, just such a nice model, Rosie, and all of you that you're describing. But what I I guess that there's running a bakery, having a premium of rents is what makes a bakery really hard. I'm in a lucky position that I've set it up in a converted barn space in Suffolk. But I would, the nugget being that like farmers have access to space, or farms have buildings like you're describing. And it's such a nice model that if you have space available, that a bakery could be on site. So that just seems like a great kind of speed dating opportunity. You know, I would love to bake on site in my area next to a farmer. I'm in conversations about that, but I just think it's that's kind of what you're describing somehow, and that model is wicked. So, you know, how do we all meet our farmer lovers or our baker lovers?
Out there. I would say what happened with Fred and I is we were friends originally, and there's a lot of trust between us. It's not written down on paper very well at all. But what we do is we have quite a progressive, I think, financial model in that I give him a percentage of turnover. So it is dependent on whether I'm working or not. Because like this week, I'd rather be here than in the bakery again. So I need to take weeks out also to replenish my energy stocks, really. And there's other things in life other than baking, sorry. So there's reasons why it felt like the right opportunity. And at the beginning, when we were just building a market, I didn't know there was going to be any customers, so I needed it to be free to start with. And we only after year one, I think, I started paying a more financial contribution to the farm. There was a lot of goodwill and other valuable things passed between us in terms of grain and time and energy and bread, but in terms of money, paper money, then it got different later. So I think start with a conversation. Everyone knows each other's limitations when you start talking about it, and things will evolve. And you keep checking in with each other, whether it's working for both parties. It was already a space that was a kitchen as well. So but we had to put 3-phase power in for the oven and the mill, and the mixer. So, and also it was financed by personally. So the business is mine, which gives me autonomy as well. It's my equipment, and I think the choices that I make in the bakery, because it's my business, there's freedom to do what I want to do. I think I'm not controlled by the farm in any way, but we do work together in terms of having an influence on each other, of course, and being responsible to each other, and accountability, I suppose, and the reciprocal of it all. It's a beautiful thing, but it's also, we're trying to be a bit more progressive about it, basically. Yeah.
I don't know if Fred, we could put you on the spot and ask you to say just a couple of words from the farmer's side of this. That would be nice. Would you be happy to do that?
I don't
Sorry.
like her.
Yeah.
Why won't she leave?
Yeah, there's a mic coming to you.
You don't need to say nice things.
I'm Fred. There's the other half of the speed dating. You did a great job, Rosie. That was amazing. Well, I don't really know what to say beyond what she said, other than the fact that you made a joke about people coming to the farm, but it's really true, and Mark's here as well. You know the feeling, like we were beavering away in this commodity wheat system, putting stuff on a lorry, and we had relationships with, for me it was Rob and Luke, the lorry drivers, my grandfather had used them, and there was those kind of relationships, but it's a pretty bleak place, to be honest. And all of a sudden now, there's like 40 or 50 people come to the farm every Saturday, and we feel part of the Southwest Grain Network, and I see Rosie every day. And actually, there was a question about, do many farmers want to be bakers, or bakers want to be farmers? Actually, for me, I never saw it in those terms. It was just about there's a role for someone to do that on the farm. There's more people on the farm, and that's been the most amazing transformation for us.
Thanks, Fred.
Thank you, Fred. There's a question just behind, or a comment.
Is there a
Could you give your name, please?
I'm Henry from Bruin Farms, and I sell heritage grain to Shipton Mill, which apparently is very good. Is there a definition of, because I've seen Rosie's set up, and it's just amazing, beautiful, and I would say it's an artisan it's got an artisan feel to it, but is there a definition of what an artisan baker is? I mean, do you have to bake with a wood oven? Do you have to, I don't know, wear clogs? I don't know. What, you know, is there a definition, and is it important to define what an artisan baker is in the baking farmer world?
I think the important thing is, Henry, that you need to be naked under the full moon when you're baking. I think that's really...
Okay, thanks.
There's no formal training in being an artisan baker. I don't actually call myself an artisan baker. I'm a baker. I have learned through working in loads of different places and gleaning knowledge from people that have these skills. And it's a skill that's through repetition and through a commitment to a process. And this way of baking that I'm baking now is definitely it's putting me on the edge. It's definitely testing and exciting and intuitive, and it is really pushing my skill level. And I think that in baking is something that you miss in the commodity system. You're about consistency and putting out the same thing every week, and I'm not doing that. So I have so much respect for peasants who do work the cycle of the fire and the fermentation and the growing. Gosh, that is a lot to take on. And that narrows down the quantity that you can put out, but it's also a beautiful thing because it's very connected to what the human can be part of and their energy level. And yeah, I also love sleep as well, so I'm kind of into using machinery to the level that I'm comfortable with. I would never work in a factory and be so disconnected from the land that food comes from. So yeah, the idea of the bakery is really more people see that landscape as theirs as well. So the locals that come and buy bread from the bakery, they're part of that landscape. It's not something that they drive by and see the watercourses getting poisoned and then grumble about later. It's their decisions that are made through the land. And also getting more bakers involved with grain testing, I think, is a really good way of engaging more bakers to see themselves as advocates of better food systems. Yeah.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Are there any other points? I can't see. I've got a shining light in my eyes there. So, yes, hand raised here. Oh, is that John?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That was all really inspiring and
Could
really
great. Could you introduce yourself?
Oh, John. John Letts. I grow heritage grains and have been for a long time. And that's my point about definitions. I think that's really important. I mean, we keep talking about grain, we keep talking about heritage grain. And in a sense, we're referring to a non-industrialized, non-commodity grain. Mm. But, well, for me, for maybe others, heritage does have a meaning and a definition, because what we're all looking for is resilience. We think that if we're growing something that's non-commodity, it's automatically resilient. But it's all about genetic uniformity, and that's what we're trying to avoid. So I'd say, I don't know, half of the heritage grain being grown in the country right now are monocultures, in my books. Just because it's old doesn't mean it's necessarily genetically diverse. So it's very important to keep in mind, you know, we're racing forward with this exponential expansion where everyone's interested in heritage grain everywhere now. No one mentioned it 25 years ago. But we're racing forward, but we've got to make sure we're racing forward in the right direction. And if we bulk up a wheat from the 1920s or the 1880s, it's actually uniform. It's not resilient in a climate sense, and we know it's happening climatically as farmers. There's no doubt. So I think that's an important thing we're kind of forgetting as we race forward with this peasant boulanger, wonderful kind of concept. And also we're going to need 2,000 peasant boulanger to feed Oxford, by the way, with the 300,000 or so people in the region. So there's room for 2,000 peasant boulangers in Oxford. So start training with Rosy and Jean-Marc and Rupert.
Maybe
it's a comment, sorry, it's not a question. No, it's a comment to say, let's please keep in mind that what we're looking for are genetically diverse populations, and that means something at a genetic level. It's not just to say, oh yeah, that's an old population, or what is that? So I think those definitions need to be worked out.
Maybe Fred could just reply to that, in that originally when I met him, he was growing single lines from accessions from dream banks, and that's the name brought all these people interested and got them to see that plant. But that's definitely just the start of the story of what we're doing on the farm in terms of populations and what suits that landscape or what tastes good, and the people that have been bringing seed onto the farm as well. If you have anything to add, yeah.
Well, only that actually I find the term heritage problematic also, but for different reasons. Because I think what I'm after is something that fits really well on the farm, and just because something's 500 years old doesn't necessarily lend it to itself. And Rosy alluded, we're a mixed farm with pigs. We actually have a very highly fertile situation, and a lot of these Orange Devon and Red Lammas, different lines that we grow, are very prone to lodging, and they don't actually dovetail well with our system. So genetically diverse populations, for me, is where we're looking to move the conversation to, from the farmer's perspective. But the heritage is really interesting because it's for the first time gave people put an identity on the wheat, as it were, and it was like a hook, and it really captured people's imaginations. And then when you have that relationship, you can then begin to flesh out around it about, well, no, actually, this is what's meaningful to me, the farmer. And I know that's just my window onto it. There's bakers and breeders and all sorts of other people around who should have a say in it. Anyway.
Mm-hmm. Rupert?
That's really, really important points. Thank you, John and Fred. I think it's all about allowing our human expression again, and like Rosy said, coming back into relationship with our surroundings, and farmers being able to grow what they feel called to and what suits them on their context, and about expressing themselves, and the bakers expressing ourselves, and I think that's what it comes back to, and it's so important that we call this term heritage isn't necessarily helpful, because really they're the grains of now. They're not the grains of the past. They're the grains of now because they're constantly evolving, and with that broad genetic base, they're evolving every single year. So we need that, don't we?
I don't think that's... Oh, it is working. I think it is really important in a time of climate change to have genetic diversity. So I agree. It's let 1,000 flowers bloom, grow what you want, and it makes total sense in a higher nitrogen environment. But the term heritage is just a proxy for genetic diversity. Mm-hmm. And I would, if you want to take it further, I'd say in my experience as a botanist and a geneticist for 30 years of growing heritage grain, I've never seen two wheat varieties cross naturally in the field. And you said that they cross-pollinate and create new diversity. Wheat doesn't do that. Rye does that. But I've never seen that in wheat. It's allogamous. It doesn't cross. So you've got to start with diversity. So there's a lot of concepts in there as a plant breeder, at a genetic level, that I think we're skipping right over. And so heritage, I can see that it's just a term. I started using it 25 years ago just as a proxy to mean genetically diverse populations. They can be modern, they can be not modern, but I use it as something, heritage, to be pre-hybrid. When people started to release hybrid weeds, that whole breeding process is about creating absolute clones, crossing them in intensive selection to make pure line varieties. Now you can mix them again and have a great population. They have short stems, they'll grow in your pig manure. That's fantastic. But the overall gene pool is hugely reduced, and that means the resilience of the crop is hugely reduced. That's evolutionary plant breeding, means working with large populations with genetic diversity. So I think heritage is really important, because to me it means pre-1900, pre-hybrid. I mean, you can have hybrid populations. That's what YQ is. I mean, they're later, and I'm not saying they're not useful at all. Let 1,000 flowers bloom. But I'm saying if you want in a low input condition, which is what I was trying to do with clover or something, with no manure. I don't have a farm. That's the problem. So I would probably be doing what you're doing. But I don't have that. So I grow low input, and that means genetic diversity, and the word heritage really means something. I think what other word? Genetically diverse populations is a really long-worded thing to say. Heritage, everyone goes, oh, I can relate to that. It's genetic diversity, it's resilient, makes sense. So I fight for the term heritage.
And please pick up a flyer. If you want to leave your contact details, please do. And help yourself to some grain. So.
I mean, John, you're saying something really important, but if I get you right, no objections with having heritage provided they're put into an evolutionary plant breeding dynamic that builds in heterogeneity and diversification. Is that right? Have no problem with heritage seeds when they're linked into an evolutionary plant breeding dynamic that builds in heterogeneity and diversity at different spatial scales in time. So you're okay with that? Yeah. Yeah. I just wanted to end on a positive. You know, there are ways forward here. Yeah. Anyway, but thanks for that comment. It's very important. I think we're coming up to time. I'm not even going to try and wrap up. I think this has been a very nice learning session and been educational all round. Thank you for the questions, the comments. The group here is around, and we can follow up and further share some information. You've heard about the residential course. There are different types of wheat and plants here, and lots of information in the head of Rosy, Jean-Marc, and Rupert. And I'd like you to thank them very much for their presentation. Thank you. That's great.